Um, we have the Philippine Futures Thinking Society. They're the organizers for this part of our session. Well, Phil Futures is the premier membership organization for foresight and futures thinking professionals in the Philippines. Their vision is to ignite the Filipino Hiraya through the power of foresight as we aim to democratize the futures thinking through education, training, research, and advocacy. To formally introduce the team, we call on let's call on Miss Nicole Pereño. Miss Nicole.
Thank you very much, Sydney, for that introduction, and Hiraya Manawari to everyone. Welcome to this session on gaming the future. And I'd like to introduce the team who will be facilitating the session for today. First off is Sherman Cruz. He is currently the chair of the Association of Professional Futurists, the largest professional foresight association in the world, with a membership of 500 professional foresight practitioners and experts in over 50 countries. He is also the chair of the Millennium Project Philippine Node, a global foresight research think tank, and an advisor to the UNESCO Dubai Future Foundation Global Futures Literacy Initiative. He was the conference chair of the 6th Asia Pacific Futures Network Conference, co-organizer of the Global Foresight Summit, partner at the CSIRO Data 61 Asia Pacific Foresight Group Australia, and partner at the Supertrends Institute. He is also the founder, executive director, and chief futurist of the Center for Engaged Foresight, a strategic foresight and futures innovation firm with global operations based in Manila. Professor Cruz is also the co-founder, vice president, and chief futurist of the Philippine Futures Thinking Society, and he is a supervising fellow at the Development Academy of the Philippines, Graduate School of Public Development and Management, certificate course on futures thinking, and part-time faculty at the UP National College of Public Administration and Governance, teaching embedding futures thinking in public policy and governance. Part of the team as well is Ms. Karen Claire Avenido. She's the membership specialist for the Philippine Futures Thinking Society, as well as Ms. Andrea Camago, who also is a membership specialist, and our very active Sean Limbaga. He is a member of Phil Futures, as well as myself. So thank you very much for allowing me to introduce the team. I will now pass this off to Sherman Cruz, who will be giving you a very brief introduction to futures thinking and gaming the future and the benefits of gamification.
Yeah, thank you very much, Nicole. So what we're gonna do today, we've got like around several minutes for around like 120 minutes. That would be like 2 hours. So what I'm gonna do is to give a brief introduction about futures and foresight, and why is it imperative, in 21st century public policy and governance, both for students and practitioners of public administration. And then the half of my presentation will be about gamification in futures and foresight. So let me just quickly give you around like 4 things that you need to take note of, when we think about the future and futures thinking and applied to public policy and foresight. One is that when we talk about the future and why is there an S in futures, is that there is no one single future out there. Right? The future is not linear. This future is not singular. So the future is not just about economic growth. So it means to say that the future is plural with an S. The plurality of futures with an S implies heterogeneity. It implies plurality. It is not about homogeneity or a vision of one single future, which is, of course, if we try to see it in the last decade or perhaps 30 years or even perhaps 50 years after the Second World War, when nation states and governments thought about recovery and they only had economic growth in mind. That eventually when people started reflecting in the 21st century, that it was blind to a lot of things like nature, technology. Politics was there definitely, but culture was also a blind spot as far as governance and administration is concerned. So they were merely focused by economic growth, by growth, growth in terms of population, growth in terms of wealth generation, growth in terms of the infrastructure that we've been building over the years that it had resulted to a lot of things that we disown today, like pollution, poverty, among other things. And that's one that when we talk about future, we don't use future, but rather we use futures with an S. Another thing is that you need to remember when we talked about futures is that the future doesn't exist yet. It is not literally the now. When we talked about futures, is that it implicitly and explicitly suggests an assumption that the future is invisible, that the future doesn't exist yet, and there's no such thing as a future fact. There's no such thing as a future data, because the future doesn't exist yet. How do you it doesn't imply that there is data about the future, because the future is literally invisible. It is not tangible yet. It is only the present that exists now. And what informs us about the now is the past, right? And normally when we do public policy, especially in the tools and the methods that we use, and that the data that enable us perhaps to have assumptions about the future, which are most of the time just a snapshot about the future, is that public policy, traditional public administration and public policy and governance extrapolates, the data that we have now as if it is the future. So in futures thinking and foresight, it gives us the opportunity to study the future that does not exist yet. So how do you study something that does not exist yet? How do you make sense of a future that does not offer us data, and then make use or make sense of a future that is invisible? How might we be able to use the future to inform and drive public policy today? That is the point of foresight. That is the purpose of future studies. That is the purpose of strategic foresight, if you want to employ that and use it from an institutional perspective. But really, the point of foresight is to enable us, for us to learn on how might we make the future as a data to inform public policy and governance today. And of course, when we talked about the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs is an assumption about the future designed and crafted in the form of a target, right? Like these are the things that we need to achieve by 2030. So in some ways, in fact, if the future becomes a target like your Sustainable Development Goals, you are using the SDGs targets as a data, to inform your public policy and governance objective. And it becomes a priority, and that would inform the way we analyze public policy today. So that's the second thing that you have to remember, right? That the future, first thing is that the future does not exist yet, and that there's no such thing as a future data, and that it is not linear, but rather it is full with alternatives. So, and last but not the least, that I would like to accentuate and point out here when it comes to futures thinking in public policy is that the future is an asset, a tool, and a resource that you can employ today to change and transform in the present. So that's what futures thinking in foresight in 4 ways in order for us to make use of the future today. Now, there are many things by which we study futures and foresight. Futures can be done as evidence-driven, that you use your data in the present, and then try to make sense of the possibilities of what the future could offer us today. So it can be evidence-based. And how do you use the future as an evidence-driven, right? When there are no datas. So in Futures and Foresight, we use our imagination as data in public policy and foresight. So we used imagination to inform and drive policy conversation. So there are many ways by which you facilitate conversation and using imagination as a resource, right? So that is why gamification exists, because in games, you play through different ways by which, for example, in the game that we will be playing today in your breakout session is what we call serious play, you know. And in foresight, as I've said, or haven't mentioned it yet, is that imagination becomes your data. And it becomes the currency by which we try to explore alternative future environments, build alternative future worlds of public policy issues and governance in the process. So, and then another one is, other than it is evidence based, is that foresight can also be facilitated in a way wherein we become creative. You know, like you build prototypes, you build proof of concepts, you speculate on specific designs about the future of like, for example, pedestrian lanes, you know, the future of traffic management, the future of processes, you know, like frontliners, you know, the future of governance when you try to employ or integrate, for example, deepfake technologies, artificial intelligence, robotics, indigenous thinking, you know, any drivers of change that you can think of, and then you try to mix, you know, all of these drivers, and let's just try to imagine, you know, what we can create or innovate in terms of system when you mix different things. You know, like it's not just informed by two variables like cause and effect, right? But rather you try to integrate and mix multiple variables that you haven't tried and done before. That it's not just about one particular cause that leads to a particular effect, or two particular causes that leads to a particular effect. But rather in gamification, you try to experiment by combining unusual variables into the public policy conversation, right? So in creative foresight is that you mix different variables that were perhaps unusual to you, that you haven't necessarily included in the way you do public policy, to anticipate or, you know, imagine the implication of 3 or 4 or 5 and 6 variables to the issue of poverty, for example. So foresight is really about improvisation. Foresight is all about experimentation, right? And trying to speculate on the implications of particular variables, you know, because the future is open. It is something that you can speculate. It is something that you can design. It is something that you can create. So that is another aspect of futures and foresight. This is not just about building evidences, but also using creativity to speculate possibilities, because the future doesn't exist yet. It's not just about the speculation or the vision of a particular political party or a particular department, of a particular leader or a particular ideology, but rather it is where you put people in the room together and speculate together about some possibilities. So that is the purpose of foresight. But then, of course, I'm not going to discuss everything. We only have a limited time here. But then you also have expertise driven. You also have interpretive driven, wherein you incorporate philosophy into the process of building foresight. So you are trying to create a gamut, you know, a spectrum of different ideas and worldviews and ways of knowing reality and different perceptions on how to imagine the future of public policy or public administration or governance. It depends on how you might want to use it. So that is basic about foresight and futures. But then what we're going to do today is to play a game that I have created several years ago, but to be specific, the idea started in 2018, and then I started to question how might we use the idea of randomness in imagining alternative future worlds, right? What is the purpose of randomness in life, right? Like I was thinking, because in public policy it was too pretty structured, that you get to choose your drivers of change, that you get to choose your crisis, that you get to choose, the things that you want to incorporate in your public policy process, right? But then I realized that in the real world, in real public policy conversation, is that there is a role of randomness in the way we do things. Of course, in public policy, we get to narrow it down. In research, we get to narrow it down. Like narrowing it down because of limitation in the resources that we make, that we get to choose only one driver or two drivers or three drivers or four drivers, because perhaps there are a lot of things that we need to consider, like the competency and capability of public policymakers, the expertise of policymakers and researchers, their own way of knowing, that we get to narrow down public policy as if it is only driven or shaped by two drivers. But in the real world, in the complexity of things, when we get out into our comfort zone, is that we realize that there are many things that are shaping public policy, like technology, culture, economy, politics. It is a pretty quite, a big world out there, that you have these different systems interacting together and generating randomness, right? So this is why we're gonna play this game today. So I'm gonna show to you, of course, this one, so that I can explain why gamification is what we're gonna do today, and why I use games, to facilitate public policy conversation that are foresight driven. Now, the question is, can foresight games expand our horizons of possibilities? Because futures in foresight is really about exploring and unpacking the possibilities out there, and using the future as an asset, and using these possibilities today to inform public policy, right? So, and really is that if there is a play of randomness that is going on in the real world, is that how might we use randomness to build an anti-fragile vision of the future? When do we say that our public policy and governance are anti-fragile? So anti-fragility in a short or in a short explanation is that it's like your parang rubber mo yan eh. It's like your anti-fragile vision of the future is that when the future or public policy becomes elastic, it's not breakable. Opposite to your fragility, it's like your mug, your Starbucks mug, that when you throw it, it breaks, right? That is fragility. Anything that is breakable is fragile, right? Like your appliances, when they shift this, when you deliver or shift, this things and stuff in the process, they always put a notice there that it's fragile. But in public policy, but in, of course, the idea of fragility is the concept, the opposite of fragility, that was coined by Nicholas Taleb in his book Anti-Fragile, is anti-fragility, because they cannot find in a contrasting or opposite term to what you call fragility, and they couldn't find a word, and they devised the word to contrast a new idea of what they call anti-fragility, something that is not breakable, something that are ideas or innovation or public policy that does not merely attempt for resilience, but rather you go beyond the idea of resilience, which is of course now what we call anti-fragile, wherein you use disruption, you use crisis, you use chaos and disorder to feed into the system, and it becomes your data, and it helps that idea to thrive in the process. So the idea of anti-fragility is not survival, but rather evolution. Rather, the idea of thriving in an age or in a system of chaos and disorder and randomness. But now we're gonna play some games today. So perhaps you can put this in the chat box. Do you remember the experience of playing your favorite game where you feel that you were finally alive or fully alive, engaged, focused, and learning in every moment? So try to remember that game that you played when you were young or still a child, or perhaps today, that the games that you're playing today that makes you feel happy, fully engaged, focused, and learning at every moment as you do it. So I would like to share you that you share in the chat box. Let's just do it for 2 minutes and try to remember the game that you remember, that will, at least give you that moment of like an that you're fully alive, engaged, focused, and learning as well. So anyone, can you help me on this, Nicole? Let's just do this for 2 minutes.
Yes, perhaps everybody could kindly share in the chat box again what game you recall as something that you were very engaged in and you were able to learn a lot. So I remember a game that was developed by the UP College of Science, and it was about climate change. They developed a board game, and it was very engaging, and it introduced people to the different concepts behind how climate change happens and what are the factors behind it. So it was very educational and very fun to play. We have here from Isaiah, he said, Battle Dawn browser based game with real-time strategy back in 2010. Very interesting. Does anybody else have any games that they remember or help them to learn?
Yep, any game when you were young. Yep. And still I'm playing it. It was introduced to me by a governor in 2010. And then he told me, Sherman, have you tried playing this game? I love playing this game because, it helps me build civilizations, right? So, and then he introduced me the game Civilization. And then he gave me a copy of that disc because by that time it was not yet cloud. So I started playing it, using a desktop, of course, computer, and I downloaded that, and ever since then I'm still playing the game. Every year a new version comes out. So it's called the Civilization 6 right now, and Jose Rizal is in that game right now. Like you use the character of Jose Rizal, to build a nation or a civilization, from starting from the pre-colonial time. Yeah, Sid Meier. Yeah, correct. Happy Street from Union, role-playing game where I meet many foreign friends. Werewolf from Andric. Agawan Base, Filipino game like Team Tag, running, protecting your fort. Okay, Sim City 4. Ano pa? Anything else? Game that
Age of Empires was a very
Okay.
educational game. It's also a real-time strategy-based video game, and it teaches you about history, world history.
Yes. Okay. So Jack and Stone is a classic game that looks easy but needs proper technique to win it. Okay. Plants versus Zombies. Yes. Yep. Okay. My 4-year-old daughter is playing Plants versus Zombies. On PS4. Yep. She's playing it at 4 years of age. Imagine, a digital literacy. You don't really need to be literate like read and write. Imagine that. Perhaps we're moving into a new world wherein writing as we know it today becomes obsolete. But she can play Plants vs. Zombies by using the PS4. But imagine if we get down into virtual reality in the process.
Yes,
Monopoly.
and some kids are learning how to code by playing in Minecraft because you have the basic building blocks in Minecraft on building circuit boards. So that's really amazing.
Yeah, imagine that. Yeah, Plague, don't remember the exact name, but it was really educational. Monopoly, Park Plague. And then perhaps we can ask some folks, if you want to speak, I just would like to hear it from you about the experience that you had, in playing that game. Anyone from the group who would like to share a bit of their experiences when they're playing their favorite game? Like, how did it change you? Did it transform you? Did it change the way you see the world? And now that you are into public administration, like, how is there, how did you, like, is it relevant as far as your studies are concerned? Yeah, anyone?
Maybe we can call on Andric, since they mentioned social deduction games like Mafia or
Mm.
Werewolf. So how has this helped you be more suspicious of your friends? You
Hi,
can
am
turn
I
on.
audible?
Yes, we can hear you.
I'm sorry, I couldn't turn my cam on because I'm having technical difficulties. But um, social deduction games like Mafia or Werewolf, it's where you have a role. For instance, you're a cop or you're a nurse or you're just ordinary citizen, and these roles they have an objective. For instance, to uh, sorry for the term, like kill all the citizens or to spot the thief or the villain of the game. And it's really where you have to be critical and you have to listen because you have to deduce who that person is playing, like what character they are having. So if you're able to successfully identify them, if you're part of like the good side, or if you're part of the civilian, then that's when you win. Otherwise, if you're not able to identify who the killer are, then you would lose. So it's really engaging, and it really makes me focus and improve my skills, not just in communication, but also in understanding and interpreting the statements of my playmates.
Does that make you think like a criminal?
Yeah, actually, there's also
Okay.
a part where if I'll pretend to be someone good, but my role is actually the villain or the killer, so I also need to strategize on ways
Mm,
that I could. So it's like I'm putting myself in the shoes of the villain or of the good side.
mm. Yeah, yeah. Imagine the world view, first person view of a criminal, no, like their way of knowing the reality. Criminal elements or criminal folks, like gangs or organized crime groups. These people are really innovative. They're always one step ahead. In fact, that's how the Interpol folks see them. They're so innovative because they don't operate on specific rules, but they operate in a particular environment and ecosystem, and they will always find a way, to execute their plans. It's kind of like these people are really innovative. In fact, from the international police, they thought of that because Interpol operates on a particular rule. There are rules of the game, right, that they cannot do, or they go beyond, and that's why criminals are always step ahead, of the game. And that's why policing is always about, like, they respond, right, to what these criminals do. They don't, like, they do not have the means to, like, uh like, first step ahead. That is what they're trying to figure out. How might they be able to do that? Like, if you've watched the movie of Tom Cruise, like, diba, Minority Report. They always want to get ahead even before the crime occurs, right? Like, they want to stop it before a crime is orchestrated, right? In fact, that's what they're thinking about now. And yeah, that is a good game. Siguro we can move now, and thank you for sharing that. And I just would like to emphasize some things here. Why do we play games? According to Jane McGonigal, who is also a futurist, is that, we play a game because reality is broken. That's according to her. And in fact, that's why we play reality today. Games today is because, innovation, when you use reality, to inform you to innovate, it just puts you in a particular scope, right? You sometimes, because if you use real data, to innovate, there are some limitations, when you use reality to generate ideas in public policy. There are limits to it. And because of that, and given that we're faced with a world that is far more becoming complex, contradictory, and chaotic as when people, and organization, institutions, and nation states become hyper connected because of the digital world that's evolving every year. They've been saying that's even, we're shifting from exponential to quantum, in terms of speed, as far as these technologies are influencing the way we do things. Reminds me of what Marshall McLuhan once said, that we shape our technology and thereafter it shapes us. And in order for us to really uh, at least make sense, give us that ability or capacity, to connect the dots much faster than we could, is that what we're doing now is to simulate things by playing games. And apparently, according to Jane McGonigal, reality doesn't offer us that capability and capacity, to think and reflect and contemplate and just simulate things that doesn't exist yet, because reality were not designed for that purposes, right? And that is why many right now, especially in public policy and governance, from the OECD level to the United Nations to the developed countries, specifically, or Asian Development Bank or the World Bank or the International Police, they are now opting to play games, to give them the opportunity to simulate things that doesn't exist yet. And according to Swahili Nayatula, the future has always been entangled with gaming, because when we simulate things, we're actually playing games, right? And these games, when simulations are not based on reality, right? Because it doesn't exist yet, right? And why foresight game? Because it builds our capacity to stretch our imagination, and it enables us to expand our perceptions, on how we see things, though, because, one philosopher have said this, 200 years ago, and then we kept on saying this, is that we don't see the things as they are, we see them as we are, right? Now, by playing these games, we go beyond, the limits of our perception. We go beyond, the things, and, parang we go beyond, the idea of seeing things as we are. It gives us the ability to see things beyond, what we are, right? And we play in order to make the process more participatory. And of course, this is what we're going to play today. It's called the Dreams and Disruption game. It's a scenario building game that uses time horizons like 2030, 2040, and 2050, up to you. You'll be drawing some cards. Nicole and the team will be facilitating this in the breakout session. So you will have drivers of change, like ideas and innovations, economic drivers, political drivers, technology drivers, so forth and so on. And then, of course, it's not just about the drivers of change that influences the shape of what might become, is that you will also have leadership archetypes, right? And movements as well, changing the conditions of change. And then, of course, you also have planetary types of disruption, disruptions that are global in terms of application. Well, contexts are important, but then, of course, when we put too much emphasis on local context, that we missed, the global perspectives as well. Because of course, the country like the Philippines, we're not really like, generator or influencers of global public policy issues. It's the other way around. You have the global stuff and movements and things that shapes public policy in the Philippines. And we're just trying to customize things to make it really relevant. But then it's not the other way around, where you have public policy in the Philippines influencing the global public policy domain. So apparently in public policy in the Philippines is that you have global forces of change that are defining, public policy. And that's reoccurring as well in South Korea, in Japan, like, for example, the COVID-19 situation, right? It had changed everything. So the idea of this game is that it will be played in 3 phases, and you will have disruptors as well to create a stress tested, because policies or imaginations need to be stress tested. You have to figure out how, to ensure that the visions that we have in the future, particularly preferred future, could evolve as new forces arrive, to build anti-fragility. And why four sad games in this game particularly is that we learn how to build scenarios by playing the game, right? So by playing the game, participants learn how to build scenarios from random drivers and anticipate emergence, those things that does not exist yet. It won't be easy for people who will play this on the first time, but the purpose is, pushing our cognitive boundaries to imagine what's possible, or to imagine initially today. Perhaps we see that it's impossible, but then later on by playing that game, you will see and make sense of it. So this game has been played 35 times all over the world, and here it helps us to think about the unthought of future. It gives us the ability to think about the things that does not exist yet. Okay, so you have randomness, leaders and movements, and planetary types of disruption coming into play as you play this game, and of course including risk and threats and the diversity of voices, because the leaders and movements are pretty quite diverse there. There are not actual people. Okay, when you play this game, they are not actual people. We only use the leaders as archetypes because there are some people who can think of a good future because of the biases that they have against these people and leaders. That's the reason why this characters are also incorporated in the game to test your worldview, because sometimes our biases and constructs are so like that when you're faced with this type of leader, that you can no longer innovate because this is the leader that you have. But then that's the real world, right? So this is the game. And then of course the idea is for us to go beyond human as well, because sometimes public policy is too human centric. The reason why you have climate change today, because we have ignored the plants and animals, the rocks, the water and the mountain and the cosmos, in our public policy issue. But then, this might come out in your game as well. So, how might you think about the future of poverty when you start using the satellite technology? Those kinds of stuff. So, this big game has been played by national scientists, 120 scientists in the Philippines and in different parts of the world, policymakers, AI experts, city technology and innovation officers, including mayors. This has been used for many climate change discussion and sustainable development for 2050. Like you have around 350 project innovation managers, communications experts, policymakers, consultants, community and social movements and foundations who are into climate change and sustainable development, including futurists and foresight practitioners, from the Association of Professional Futurists, the Future Space, the Philippine Futures Thinking Society, the Asia Pacific Futures Network, the Edinburgh Futurists, and the Super Trends Institute. And then of course, why are we playing this game is because, let me just go back to because complex systems are weakened or killed when deprived of randomness and stressors. We haven't been trained to use randomness in public policy. That's not just the way we've been doing it in the last 200 years. Perhaps some sectors might be wrong, but I haven't seen a case study that uses randomness in public policy and governance. It's always about choosing, our drivers of change, like political drivers, economic drivers. We choose them. But then, of course, we cannot choose our crisis, right? We just don't choose our crisis, because crises emerge and they become popular mainstream when they come. It's like you're playing games. So there are three phases here. Just give me a couple of minutes before we get into the Q&A. Is that the phase one is dreams, right? Like you will be given multiple drivers of change, and by combining these multiple drivers of change, is that you start imagining the scenarios of how might the world look like when you're faced with these specific drivers of change. Right? Like, I'm going to give you an example of drivers of change. Let's just say authoritarianism as a political driver, and then another driver comes out, like, for example, artificial intelligence, right? And then you put another driver, like an economic driver, let's just say cooperative. And then you put another driver, let's just say a cultural driver, like indigenous systems. So how might by 2050 in a preferred future scenario? So you have, for example, you use these drivers of artificial intelligence, authoritarianism, cooperativism, which is of course really different from the idea of authoritarianism, as a political driver. And then the last one, what did I say? Indigenous ba yun? Yeah, indigenous culture. So what would a preferred future world look like for you when you try to combine these drivers of change? You start imagining the scenarios. By 2050, how might the world look like by combining these four drivers of change? Well, you start to wonder and start to imagine how might the world look like in these scenarios. In a scenario wherein you have four drivers of change. So you have play of randomness. You try to think of a hybrid future out there. So the hybrid futures can be worst case scenario. If it tells you you got a card like worst case, think of the worst case, or a scenario of worst case scenario with your four drivers of mind, or a weird or outlier, or a preferred, or perhaps integrated. And then that's the first one. Now with your dreams, and then then the phase two is that you get to draw a card of a leader, or the card that might come out is a movement. Like, let's just say, for example, the leader that you were able to draw in this game is Mahatma Gandhi. So how might your preferred future look like with your four drivers of change in mind with this type of leader? If you don't know about Mahatma Gandhi, you can Google that out. But of course, we all know that Mahatma Gandhi is a spiritual leader, right? Who was a champion of political rights and freedom, and non-violence, with your preferred future in mind. What kind of policies or innovation would Mahatma Gandhi do, to reinforce your narrative, or perhaps that could change your narrative as well. The conditions of change. And then last but not the least is the third phase, is that you try to imagine the future world when a planetary type of disruption like ocean system collapse occur. How might your innovations and policies change in the process? So it's a conversation of rethinking and reimagining and reframing of what's possible with this random drivers of change. So I'm going to give you an example, like in a workshop that we did for UNESCO. Participated in by like around 30 people during the UNESCO Futures Literacy Summit. So they were faced with this particular drivers of change and had the conversation. About 2 hours, this is the world that they were able to create. Rastafari Future World by 2050, wherein it says that harnessing ocean waves to power coastal communities and future economy. Where ocean algae, imagine the world wherein ocean algae solve global hunger, that our oceans become a haven for ocean philosophy and philanthropy. Public administration and governance today is land-based, right? It's geographic, land-based. Now, how might the future of public administration and governance look like when you have an ocean-based society by the year 2050? What would that imply for public administration governance? I'm just trying to pose a question here. And then they imagined a less governed ocean city, or beyond the internet and the outer net is the wet net. Suddenly they devised this idea of a wet net as an alternative to the internet. And then you also have highly interoperable seaports and airports via the ocean cities that are less governed. It's Rastafari, right? Dolphins and octopus and whales and more are granted legal personhood. They have the right to vote. Because apparently in this scenario is that the society was able to develop a technology wherein animals can now speak to you. It's beyond dogs, right? So what if this animals through the development of the technology, they can speak their minds, that they become part of the public policy process. It's a Rastafari world, right? And then oceaner philosophies and lifestyle, love of ocean. Dolphins, octopuses, and whales, and more ocean creatures are granted legal rights. So that's one. And then another world, this was a conversation that we had for some European folks, and they started to think of a future world by the year 2150. And some drivers were different, but then the major driver here apparently is spirituality, right? So they imagined the future of spiritual abundance by 2150. You have super virtual society that enables the creation of highly spiritualized global society, the shift from healing to meaningfulness, right? The pandemic is a driver of change. And then after 50 years, every people become really highly spiritual. It's not religious, but spiritual, right? And then they thought of a well-being excellence center set up that eliminates the scarcity of abundance mindset, the exclusion of others, mental and spiritual depression. Then the creation of peace cooperatives, wherein these cooperatives were created as a superstructure to eliminate direct, indirect cultural, social, and structural violence. And then you also have spiritual technologies, or Spiritual Technology Equity and Fair Access Act of 2150, wherein you have, there must be a universal equitable access to spiritual insurances. Spirituality becomes a universal right. If spirituality becomes a public good, wherein you have products, communities, and services. So these are some of the example that they were able to generate by playing the Dreams and Disruption game. It's all innovation. It's all about thinking of what things that does not exist yet. But then, of course, you will see that in your game. Some of the examples that were generated in a game that we had for chief and technology innovation officers in the US, like around 60 folks participated that, and they started imagining the future of smart cities by playing the Disruption game. Now you have Data Drives Democracy in the Garden of Eden. You have a scenario wherein Jurassic waters emerges, of course, and then animals vote by 2050, and then you have opportunity spheres. I'm not going to discuss the scenarios, but if you want to look at this, I'm going to share you the report. And then this is another workshop that I had for another group of innovation technology officers and strategic visioning for the future of smart cities. They started working on those. And then, of course, social, political violence, social unrest, less global connectivity, and then massive use of deepfakes. And then you also have these scenarios as well. Okay, so these are innovation fellows for the United Nations refugee group. They started innovating ways by which they can address the issue of refugee by playing the Dreams and Disruption game. And then they would have, liquid wealth as ideas, countermeasures against antivirus, and working against depression. Then they would introduce the idea of refugee islands in different parts of the world, UN building these refugee islands wherein they are really they would emerge as places for refugees. Okay, so I'm gonna stop here, and I'm gonna stop now. It's 1:47, so I'm gonna bring this back to Nicole now.
Thank you very much, Sherman, for that very wonderful introduction to gamification, the importance of futures thinking and foresight, and a little bit of an introduction on how to play Dreams and Disruption. So before we go ahead to playing the game here in the plenary, we'd like to invite everyone to turn on their video cameras so we can take a group photo. All right. Should I take the photo, Mikey, or is somebody from the tech team in charge of that?
Just count down, Nicole.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, for turning on your cameras. So if you can, please turn them on, and we'll take the photo in 3, 2, 1. Thank you very much, Mikey, and thank you, Sherman, for joining us. We understand you have to go in a bit, but if we have any questions from the audience, please do ask them now in the chat box, or you can turn on your microphones.
Yep, any question, comment, feedback? Dreams and Disruption is a serious play game. Okay? Yep, serious play. Yep, Isaiah.
Hello, hi, can you hear me? Yeah, so I was really interested. I love the topic. I love playing strategy games like civilizations as well, also resource management. I'm really interested in what you were saying about, we need to simulate. We also need to use our imagination to simulate, because our brains are actually probably better at simulating right now than we could possibly code a machine for at least human development, right? What will we as people look like in 50 to 100 years? And I'm reminded about, I was watching this documentary about how the Japanese build their wooden houses, where their maintenance schedule is 60 to 100 years. And here in the Philippines, our maintenance schedule is 3 to 5 years. And for us, 30 years is long term. And my father shared with me that before, when he did strategic planning with AIM, they would look at 50 years as like the longest term that they could imagine, whereas their Japanese counterparts were looking at 300 years as medium term. And so it's kind of that like long term thinking that I'm very interested and very excited to see that the Philippines is getting more into. I'd just like to ask what your opinion is of, for example, war games, and more recently what Bill Gates calls germ games. Are these games that are being played right now, or have you had any experience with those?
And for war games, yes. Yep. I played a lot of war games there. In gaming, you get to have a lot of war games. In fact, the idea of scenarios started with war gaming, right? When they started simulating, wars, right? Because wars, there are many, conditions that might emerge that you might not have anticipated, right? So the purpose of war gaming is to reduce surprises, right? Because when you're faced with something that you haven't anticipated, that it becomes a source of anxiety, right? It becomes a source of, if you can't address it, that could mean or lead to a crisis, right? And in scenario development, it actually started with war gaming. That's why you have more sophisticated games or scenario development processes right now, because we develop these tools in order for us to reduce surprises and increase our capacity to prepare and develop contingencies, right? If the perspective is for crisis management, right? Because as much as possible, we would want to reduce surprises. And if you're able to spot and anticipate things, and when they occur, you're prepared, right? You're not surprised by it, right? And then for innovation purposes, is that there are games as well that leads to innovation, like the development of a new thing or stuff that haven't been thought of before. Like, for example, a game that was developed by a colleague, Stuart Kendi, who is currently a professor at forgot the university, but he's one of the leading futurists when it comes to design or speculative design. Is the game that he developed called together with his team at the Situation Lab, the Thing from the Future game, right? Iba din yun, no? It's for design purposes, right? Yep.
I also really like your job title, futurist. I really like that. I was listening to a podcast recently where they had an audio futurist or an audio engineer who's also a futurist, and is also a fiction writer, and I think similar to your job. And what she was pointing out was there are sounds today that are going extinct, such as no one knows the sound of a telephone spinning. Very few people have heard that, or even the sound of radio cackle. And what she predicted was in the next 100 years, kids may no longer know the sound of birds, or will not even know the sound of a gasoline engine as we start to replace.
Wow,
and so
great.
her work in terms of future, in terms of audio, is she's trying to preserve these man-made and natural sounds because she already expects them to go extinct in the next few decades. So again, you're doing very interesting work. Thank you for sharing with us today.
Yep. Thank you very much for that, Asaya. Yep. Reminds me of a colleague as well, who is currently the foresight head for the United Nations Development Program. And then what she wished was actually if she could only record the voice of her grandmother, she would have done that. Because she missed her a lot. And, right now, in hindsight, she said that, if she could had just had that opportunity to record her voice, she would have recorded it. Imagine that. So when it comes to intergenerational foresight, I think we should record ourselves right now. And apparently, this in the age of social media, I think this would become a source of a resource. And they, that now that they have everything, your recordings among other things, they could sell that in the future, right? It could be a future market as well. And right now we're recording all of this conversation. It's in the cloud. You're no longer reading a book, but you just play it, and then they could see us having a conversation about them by 2100.
Do we have any other questions? Thank you again, Isaiah, for that very insightful question. And I just wanted to share that some futurists actually play out scenarios using war games. So I heard of this round of games where they assign different people to represent different countries. And there was a game master who would reconcile what each country wanted to do. So that's something that you can look into if you're interested to learn more about being a futurist. And we also invite you to join the Philippine Futures Thinking Society if you'd like to know more. We'll share a little bit more information about that in the chat box. So if there are no other questions, we can proceed to playing the game. Last call, if anybody would like to ask anything. I know we have participants here from Japan, from China, from Korea, Australia, and of course from the Philippines.
If none, I would take the last 2 minutes, siguro, Nicole, just to share some insights from those who played this game, and of course, other games that I also used in my workshops. Is that sinabi niya, game transcended analysis. It helped me wonder what's possible. And then the question, can play help enable me to reconstruct old constructs, reframe relationship between human and non-human? And then another insight or reflection after playing games is that I played with my own biases using my ideologies. But when I played this game, in the process, it got me thinking whether or not ideologies are relevant at all. When change evolves and disrupts and randomness come into play. Is our ideologies relevant when randomness come into play? And then another one would ask this question after playing the game: are our perceptions superficial? Are our perceptions superficial? The game has exposed the borders of my own worldviews. It forced me to reimagine, how I perceive leadership, change, and agency. The preceding new imaginary struck me because I was now facing a foreign world, that doesn't exist yet. And then last insight and lesson learned was like, it built my capacity to stretch my imagination in a renewed and playful way. It enabled me to move beyond narrow and mechanistic responses, and I've learned how to embrace the world in complexity. Yep. So yes, that's it for me, Nicole. I hope you enjoy the game.
Thank you very much, Sherman. And again, we'd like to remind everybody, if you could please turn on your video cameras while we play this game so that it's more interactive. Thank you very much, Sherman, for spending time with us here and for explaining very well how we can best use foresight and gamification to think about the future. And I would like to share my screen at this moment, and this is the tool that we will be using for today as we play Dreams and Disruption. So this is a Miro board where you have all of the information on how to use it, but your facilitators for today, Karen, Andrea, and Sean, will be helping us post everything while we play this game, and you can learn more about the team. So the first thing that we need to do is to draw a card, and I will share that screen now so that we can draw the dreams that we will be thinking about this future, the time horizon, and what kind of future will be playing out. So let me draw one card from the deck, and what we drew was a weird future 1 century from now. So that's in 2121. And what we're thinking of is a weird future. So anything is possible in this, and the more absurd it is, the better. If your ideas make you laugh, the better it is. So if you could put that on the board, please, Phil Futures, thank you. And now we need to select 4 drivers of change. So what we have to choose from are nature, societal, political, economic, cultural, ethical, and spiritual, or the technological drivers. So please either type in the chat box or unmute yourself to let me know which card you'd like to draw. We'll choose 4. So let's type that in. Don't spend too much time thinking about it. Just select one. I'm going to start calling people. Yun Min Jae, hi. Which card would you like to draw? Which driver? Which category?
Hi, I'd like to draw nature drivers. Maybe.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. That's great. So a driver of change here is the rainforest. So please put that on our Miro board as well, team. I'm going to call the people. Who else are our participants here? Isaiah, if you're still here, could you give us a driver that you'd like to introduce to our game for this afternoon?
Okay, wait, how does this work? How do the drivers work again? I'm sorry.
We will be using these drivers to shape the future that we're going to build together. So this is a collaborative game where we're going to share our ideas on how we think different drivers will affect a weird future a century from now. So don't think too much about it. Just select one.
Rainforest? Are those?
Use societal, political, technological.
Oh,
or
okay,
economic.
okay.
These.
I'll add an economic driver.
Okay, an economic driver, and that is a circular economy. So Sean, if you could share in the chat box a little bit more information about a circular economy. Thank you, Isaiah. And we're going to call one more person. Andrick, could you please select one driver, an additional driver of change?
Okay, I would choose political drivers.
Okay, political driver. And we have centralization. Okay, so no federalism here in this future that we're thinking about. And one last driver, Mikey, if you could select one.
Nature, political, and economic have already been taken, right?
Yes, so we have societal, technological, or cultural, ethical, spiritual.
Cultural, ethical, spiritual.
Okay, thank you. For our last driver then, this is individualism. So please put that again on the board, team. And if you can, again, share, Andy, in the chat box what individualism is. Okay, so I'm going to share again our Miro board. And our very helpful facilitators have placed on the board our drivers of change. And you can access the Miro board, the link in the chat box. And now building our dreams. So we have here a prompt. Our task right now is to use these 4 different drivers of change as building blocks, scaffolding, or the foundation, or the logic for the scenario that we're going to build, which is a weird future a century from now. Now, what would the story be in this hybrid future world, and how might the future look or feel like if you have a weird future with drivers of change being the rainforest, centralization, a circular economy, and individualism? So we can just start sharing what ideas we might have. And thank you, Sean, for posting in the chat box what a circular economy is. And Andy, if you could also share what individualism is. So in a 2021 weird future where the world is centralized and a driver of change is the rainforest, a circular economy, and individualism, what do you think might happen? Now, we didn't put here on the board whether the rainforest is still there or if it's gone. That's for us to decide. So in a weird future, what might happen to the rainforest is the entire world engulfed in the rainforest, for example, how we've been able to regrow everything? Has Mother Nature reclaimed urban cityscapes? What sounds weird to you? So please share your ideas with us. You can put them in the chat box or unmute yourself. And I'm going to start calling people again, since we have very limited time. Isaiah, what do you think? You can choose between 1, 2, 3, 4 of these drivers, how they might interact with each other. What do you think? We have here Isaiah, Andrick, Margarita, Mark, Christopher, Kunwu Park, Yunmin J, Maiko Minami, and Nayonika Bhattacharya. I'm sorry, did I say that correct? Please let us know. Okay, Christopher, let me explain again the mechanism of the game, how we play the game. So we have drawn cards about the different drivers of change, which will help shape our future. So this game is all about imagining. What do you think a weird world would look like in 100 years with these particular drivers of change? If you have centralization, a circular economy, individualism, and the rainforest playing a big role in this. Sherman explained a little bit earlier how some people have played this game and what futures they were able to come up with. So is that an okay explanation? Do you have any additional questions, Christopher? We'll learn as we play.
I think it's clear, ma'am. Thank you for the explanation.
Okay, thank you. What? Okay, I'm gonna call more people. Hi, Mikey.
Hi, Nico. I'm still trying to imagine. So, I have to think about 2121 and connect one driver or two drivers of change. Is that right?
Connecting 1, 2, 3, or 4 drivers of change.
Oh.
Yes, which would result in a weird future. So I gave an example of maybe in 100 years, the entire world is covered in rainforest.
Oh, okay. I'm thinking that in 100 years, because people are individualistic, they can privatize rainforests and own their own rainforest in their backyard. Does that make sense?
Yes,
So you can
sense.
buy your own private rainforest and the animals there. So it's kind of good for the environment, but it's kind of weird because you have your own rainforest.
Thank you, Mikey. Yes, and don't worry if it makes you laugh. That's the perfect example of a weird future. And thank you, team, for typing that on the board. So we have here based on the political driver of centralization. So you have the rise of populist politics causing ripple effects in our government, which ignores green technologies and green policies and highlights big corporations as drivers of economy. Free trade worsens the North and South dichotomy. That's a very good example. So this also plays with the privatization of rainforests because people would buy it instead if they wanted to breathe fresh air, because the government is not taking care of that. So another one is populist politicians disregarding climate change, highlighting the heavy use of shale oil and fossil fuels and private enterprise for natural resources. Another one is, my suggestion is, in 100 years from now, we live in a circular economy, money becomes obsolete and people interact using a barter system. Yes. So what else? How else can these drivers interact with each other? If we don't have money anymore, what do people use to trade? What is valued? Okay, Sydney. Yes.
banking on the future that Mikey envisioned, and as well as from the comments here, I'm thinking the currency would be seedlings.
Ah,
Could be.
so plantito and plantita to the max. Thank you, Sydney. Christopher, yes.
Okay, if I have to imagine the things, I think the root cause of the change is the political driver, which is centralization. I think the the states in 100 years from now will be very centralized. So as the state controls everything that happens throughout the country, and then it causes the states to be able to manage it like very effective. Like so they can control the conservation of rainforest, and they can control like the whole circular economy, and the people in that country just become more individualized as they feel like the state is just controlling everything. So they're just like they just thinking about themselves, about how they can survive in that kind of situation.
Thank you so much, Christopher, for that. That's a very good example, and you guys are starting to get into the game now. So if anybody else would like to provide their insights while we're talking about the dream. So again, this is a weird future. What else would you imagine in this weird future? And thank you again, team Karen, Andy, Sean, for capturing all of the insights. Perhaps you'd like to add something, Karen?
I think given the what we are already discussing, I'm imagining that in 2121, maybe the climate will climate situation will not be that good, or not to be so pessimistic, but given the scenarios provided, maybe the climate is already at a very problematic state. Yeah, that's what I can think of right now.
Okay, thank you, Ken. So we've got a problematic state with a centralized government disregarding green policies, and we have people privatizing their oxygen. And we have our hand raised here. Kunwu Park, please feel free to share with us your ideas.
I think we might have a way to communicate with the animals in the rainforest. Maybe. So maybe people talking to the monkeys, or people communicating with the snakes, whatever. Yeah, that's what I thought.
Thank you for that. And how else might that affect how people interact with animals, since we have this on the board that people are privatizing their own rainforest so they can have the animals in their own backyards.
Maybe people will not be the dominant race in this world anymore, and maybe we might have fight against other races. Like races, I think, is not going to be separated into the races as it is right now, like maybe Asians or like, you know, but I think it might be separated as leopards, or, you know, yeah.
So you're imagining a world where in 100 years from now you have human animal hybrids, is that correct? Or do animals just talk?
Maybe both. I don't know.
It's okay. That's fine. Thank you. So because we can imagine that we're competing against or in a world where animals can just talk, or we're in a world where there are human animal hybrids, so they have different abilities, but are able to do things similar to how humans are able to do them. So in this world, are we prey? Because right now humans are at the top of the food chain. We are the biggest predator on this planet. So what does this look like for us? Do you want to add to that scenario, or would somebody else like to build on that?
I would like someone else to build on.
Okay, no worries. Thank you so much. Let me call on someone else. If you feel comfortable, Nayonika, would you like to add? I saw you in the chat box earlier. Oh, here. What else would you like to add something, Nayonika? Or Mark, Margarita, are you guys here? Oh, are you raising your hand, Karen?
Yep, I got pretty interested on the sharing earlier about communicating with animals. So maybe perhaps during this time, humans and animals will have a conversation on how we can solve the problem, climate problem, or maybe we'll also start talking about rights, animal rights versus human rights, and how we can um, co coexist in the planet, something like that.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you. Yes, that's a very good thing we can take into consideration, especially when we move into the next section of the game. I see here in the chat box we have from Nayonika. Thank you, Nayonika, for sharing this. She would like to add that the kind of rainforests that we see in this weird future are absolutely different. You have new species of trees, new mutations and breeds of wildlife, and new human diseases we will solve using spiritual methods. That's very nice, because if you have communicative animals, maybe we get to know more about how to become closer with nature. And while people are individualistic, maybe there's something else that will bind us all together if we're trying to save this weird world from a climate crisis. Now we have 30 minutes left, and I would like to move now to the next section of the game. So this is where we select our leader or the movement, which can change how this future world is developing. So I'm going to reshare our itinerary. Let me get that screen up. And we can draw another card. All right. So we're going to be drawing now one card here from the leaders and movements. And the, oh, I hope it's a good one. We get Harvey Milk. Harvey Milk. I watched a movie about his life, but maybe we can type in the chat box a little bit more about Harvey Milk in case he's not known to everybody here, and so that we have a better idea of his persona or personality. Okay. And we go back to our Miro board. If you can type that, Sean, more information about Harvey Milk. He is the first oh, thank you, Gino. First LGBT politician from San Francisco. He became one of the first openly gay officials in the United States when he was elected to the San Francisco Board of Supervisors. Okay, so let's try to read up more about Harvey Milk. So he was the most famous and most significantly open LGBT official ever elected in the United States, advocating for the rights of the LGBT community. He was a civil and human rights leader. So he need not be the exact person that's leading us in this future, in this weird future, but somebody similar. It's just a persona type. So if Harvey Milk was openly advocating for the rights of the LGBT community, in this future world that we're building, this weird future world where you have humans and human-animal hybrids, what would you think this Harvey Milk leader type would be advocating for? What is he calling attention for in this weird future? I have an idea, but I'd like to hear your thoughts. I'm gonna start calling people again. Andy. Hello, Andy.
Hi. Hey guys. So if we envision this weird future with Harvey Milk as one of the top leaders of this weird future, probably he or this type of person would make everything or would be how do I say this? He would be very open to different kinds of people. He's not like um is not like close-minded, very open-minded to this to the things that could happen in this weird future. So he would gatekeep things rather. So more open-mindedness, I guess.
Thank you, Andrea. And this was something also posted in the chat box. He would advocate for an inclusive society.
Yes,
So
exactly.
so if we have this advocacy for an inclusive society, somebody who's championing the rights of perhaps the different races, the human animal hybrids, how might the different things we've put on the board here previously change? Would there be any change? Would anything be amplified? Would there be any big changes in how our world is going if you have a leader with a Harvey Milk persona emerging? So I imagine that he might become the head of the government. He might be able to rally enough support for him to win an elected position. And then how might that change the future? We don't even know if this Harvey Milk type would be a human or if he's a human animal hybrid. So what are your thoughts? Please share with us how you'd like to build this world. Okay, I see some hands raised. Mark.
Yeah, I think that as more people privatize privatize rainforest, and as the value for rainforest and animals increase, I think that this kind of leader would make sure that everyone, regardless of their gender, would have access to these resources.
Thank you, Mark. In this kind of world, would you say that perhaps gender equality is not such a big, hopefully gender equality is not such a big issue 100 years from now? What else, what other kind of equality might we need to focus on?
I think that the issue with human and animals, I think that in this kind of society, both would be given like equal rights.
Mm-hmm.
Like the rights that the humans are receiving will be the same as the rights that the animals are receiving.
Okay. Did all of the sticky notes disappear all of a sudden? Okay, no, there we can see it. Thank you, Mark. I got nervous for a bit there. Christopher, could you share with us? I see your hand is raised.
Okay, I think with having Milk as our leader, I think our community will, I think he will grant the freedom of speech before anything, because I think by his virtue of openly stated that if he is gay, I think he will want to grant the same things to all of his citizens, and so hopefully there will be no discrimination between all of his subjects, even in any fields, like even in gender or in maybe social economic status. And I think like that. Thank you.
Thank you, Christopher, because again, the world that we were building earlier, we saw that corporations had privatized everything, and there was unequal access and unequal distribution of nature. So the rainforest became a prized commodity, and we were bartering with seedlings. So Karen, please.
Yeah, thanks, Nicole. We're talking about equal rights between humans and animals. So I was thinking how this could affect our diet. So maybe we will change or we'll shift to plant-based diet, or yeah, something like that. And maybe Harvey Milk will pass a law regarding all humans not consuming animals anymore, because yep, in this future we imagine him to promote an inclusive society, and of course eating each other is not the way to go. Yeah, so maybe plant-based diet in this future.
Thank you, Karen. Jean, would you like to add something?
Uh, I think since he's very inclusive leader, and a lot of the world has been filled with rainforests and seedlings as the currency, I think he'd focus on funding research regarding uh, plant-based diet, so that we'd have a more uh, complex menu and ingredients. And also, I think maybe they invest more on research regarding the human animal hybrids and how that would work. So that, because I'm thinking if we initially there'd be a lot of mutants, if that's the right term, since it's a new innovation. So I think by the time Harvey would end his leadership, we will already perfect the human hybrid race.
Thank you very much, Jean. And that's a very important thing that we should note, that we need to look at how we can make society more inclusive on all fronts, not just because people are allowed freedom of speech. That means that they're considered equal and part of the larger community that makes decisions. We have here from Nyonika, I think we may also eat more insect and microorganism produced protein on that note of not eating animal products. We might also develop completely sugar-free diets because of how bad it is. Our organ sizes may vary too. So the human body may also evolve based on our diets and the surroundings. And since we didn't discuss having insect human hybrids, let's exclude that from our future, because the idea of a human-sized mosquito makes me very nervous, and a human-sized flying epis, flying cockroach. So let's not include them in the speaking population. We have here from Michael, I think our society will be more open and kind to minority groups. Voices from all of the communities will be reflected. Yes, so this is how our leaders can affect the world that we live in. And I see your hands are raised. Sorry, Sean, you lowered it. Would you like to add something?
To clarify to emphasize only the point previously mentioned by Michael, I think since by the time Harvey is elected as one of the government officials who have a highly impactful narrative in our society, I think he would implement laws or policies that would direct us from the narrative of privatizing rainforest um, rainforest in our own backyard. So me I'm possibly thinking of having him like creating laws or policies that would allow people to have a community sense of farming in such a way that everyone has an access to food security.
That's great, Sean. Thank you for adding that. We also have two more hands raised, Gino and then Mikey after.
Hello. Yes. I think it would be best to also add something that's related to the rights of indigenous peoples. Because if I could recall one of the keynote speakers earlier from Mr. Yebsanyo, he talked a lot about the role of nature in the development of human societies. And we also have to consider for a leader like Harvey Milk to recognize the rights of indigenous peoples, because most of them live on nature. Like, for example, the Ifugaos here in northern Philippines, they value the culture of rice cultivation and their deities. I think, and also for the Ainu people in Japan, they also value human life, and it might be a bit dark term, but also human death as well. They also practice rituals that are more connected to nature. So it would be important for leaders such as Harvey to also recognize the rights of indigenous peoples, their own cultures. They have their own micro societies as well.
Thank you very much, Gio. And that's important for us to consider if in this future world you suddenly have animals who can communicate with us. So aren't they the truly indigenous owners or people on this planet? Since they were here long before us and possibly have rituals or ideals and values that are more in tune with how we should respect and protect nature. Mikey.
I'm also thinking about technology in 2121. I'm thinking that because we live in a world where everything is more sustainable, we have more rainforests, we're able to adapt more to climate change impacts. Maybe our technology is also in balance with nature, like could have Wi-Fi trees, or I don't know, maybe, but our technological solutions would be more not in conflict with nature. We don't have to choose one or the other, but it can live in harmony. So maybe remote learning. We won't really have remote learning, but we can like work from our tree houses, or maybe rainforests don't have to be on land. Maybe they can be vertical or something like that, or on oceans. I don't know. So I'm just thinking about technology at this time.
Thank you, Mikey. And what you're talking about reminds me of the movie Avatar, where people just plug into Mother Nature. So that's real biotech for you. Not just Wi-Fi trees, but learning from Mother Nature and sharing our knowledge with one another. This is one dream of mine, learning via osmosis. And we have 15 minutes left, so we'll proceed. Thank you, everyone, for all of your inputs. We'll proceed to the next part of the game where we get to the disruption. So this is the last card that we will be drawing for this game. And what do we get? We get nature's of solar flares. So if you can share in the chat box, Andy, what I'm sorry, I got disconnected very quickly. So what are solar flares? And this is a planetary disruption that will change the future, again, as we've built it in the past two iterations. So the task is, how might this disruptive or catastrophic event of a planetary scale change or impact our hybrid future world? What would our hybrid future world look like? How might this world respond, mitigate, and manage the crisis? So take into consideration, again, the dreams that we've built and the kind of leader that we have in the persona of Harvey Milk. What happens once we get massive solar flares happening? So again, what are solar flares? A solar flare is a sudden flash of increased brightness of the sun. Here. Usually observed near its surface and in close proximity to a sunspot group. Powerful flares are often, but not always, accompanied by a coronal mass ejection. Even the most powerful flares are barely detectable in the total solar irradiance. So what happens? How do solar flares impact our world? What are your thoughts, guys? What happens? Do we end up having geomagnetic storms? Oh, Sydney, please.
Yeah, I was about to say something similar, since in the chat they've mentioned ways on how we were able to adapt to that weird future is we develop some organs, maybe the plants also, the Wi-Fi trees, they're heat resistant, something like that. To be able to adapt, not just the trees, but us, the humans, our skin, there were changes we had to undergo for us to adapt to the new or to that current environment that we will have.
Thank you, Sydney. So our world starts to adapt then to the solar flares that are happening, and how we adapt as well. We have here Andy. Solar flares sound scary, but they won't exactly destroy the Earth. The sun's occasional eruptions could reach our planet if they are especially powerful, and at that point may cause damage to power grids. So in a tech connected world, you might end up losing our communications with one another, may interfere with radio signals, with power connections. But that doesn't seem to be something that might badly impact the world that we've built, since it's a world that's returned back to nature. However, what are some other impacts that you guys might see happening in this weird future? Do we suddenly decide to all live underwater? Or do we strengthen our protection against solar flares by building a giant umbrella canopy over the world? What are some of your thoughts? Oh, Sydney, capture solar flares as a source of energy. Yes, perhaps that technology will be developed by that time, and everything that could be negative, we try to turn it into a positive in this world. So we're developing and adapting to become more resilient. What else would you guys like to add? We have many friends here from the UP Resilience Institute, and we have our hand raised. Kunwu Park, would you like to share?
I think it will somehow affect the ultrasonic waves, like how how we connect to Wi-Fi and stuff, like the world that we don't see, maybe. Yeah, the waves and stuff. So I think we might have problems connecting into Wi-Fi, and maybe trouble communicating with people in the other side of the world. And I also thought of maybe this could impact the way we live. Maybe today we're living over the ground, but after this, maybe we will all have to live underground, and maybe make towns in caves and stuff. Yeah, that's what I thought.
Thank you, Kunu. That's a very good point. It would change how it could change possibly how we live. So we might start to retreat back into the inner cores of the earth. And how else might we communicate with each other if you think that this might affect the grids and the radio waves and signals that we have? Would you like to add to that, Kunu?
Maybe like that back there we will have connections, Wi-Fi connections that could maybe break through walls. So not only through air, but maybe the waves from the Wi-Fi could break walls, and like someone in the other side of the world maybe can connect to a Wi-Fi at that is located at the other side of the world. So to give an example, maybe I can connect to a Wi-Fi connection that is currently under a cave in Paris, maybe. Yeah, that's what I thought. Thank you.
Thank you, Kunu. And Sean, would you like to share with us what you just typed?
Yeah, sure. So I was thinking of since we would like to mitigate this disruption, I was thinking of having public housing that would be resistant from the solar flare. And in order to actively communicate with other people, I was thinking of having an underground system of road that is directly connected to our houses as well, and maybe a teleporting system if it's possible.
Thank you, Sean. And this idea of the public housing brings up that would our world catch on fire because of the solar flares and the very thick rainforest? Are we prone to igniting and having is that something that that could arise as a problem? So perhaps you'd like to add some more thoughts. Thank you, everyone. We'd like to hear from everyone if you'd like to share with us as we build this future world. How else might this disruption impact the life that we're living then? Would some of the human-animal hybrids be more prone to being negatively affected by solar flares, for example, because we're all, again, differently composed, differently evolved? And what about the human-animal hybrids who need to be protected from very high heat temperatures, for example? What happens to them, and how, again, will our Harvey Milk leader persona ensure that they're protected? We have a few more minutes, and then we can proceed to a debrief and gathering of some reflections of you guys. Oh, here, Kunu, thank you. Maybe we could have a new functional sunblock. Very nice. What kind of sunblock is in a weird world? Are we still applying sunblock physically? What do you think?
Maybe like even we don't like apply it, maybe the sunblock could be like, I don't know, like a spray, maybe like once in a while that the spray could be sprayed in the air, and maybe even though if we don't physically put on sunblock, maybe that pump could help us. I don't know, like this was just an idea that came up through.
Thank you, Kunu. And I see Yun Minjae, you added something. We can spray some chemicals in the atmosphere that they can block the UV rays or other harmful rays. Oh, and Gino said we could make an artificial ozone layer, which is a better idea than making an artificial sun mirror. And I'm thinking also, since we have human-animal hybrids, what is saying that humans can't change? Like maybe we have adapted or have replicated some of the normal bodily functions of some animals that we see today. For example, humans can regrow their teeth like sharks. Maybe something similar for how we can be heat resistant and be protected from the sun. Like suddenly you develop a very thick armor of scales. And Andy added solar flare-proof communication devices. Thank you, everyone. We'll close this session with me explaining a little bit more about how to play this game. It was very great playing this with you guys, and thank you for all of your inputs and insights. So there are many different ways that this game could go, because you have different kinds of futures. You have a weird future, a preferred future. You also have a worst future, and that would impact how we imagine the future going. And there are many different types of drivers as well, and many different leader types, and many different disruptions. In one of the games that we played previously, the world leader was Madonna, and that impacted how the world developed, because we all thought that, okay, she's an advocate of women empowerment, and so maybe there will become a church of Madonna, and she'll become a religious spiritual leader and invite everybody to become yoga fanatics or do Kabbalah. So there are many different ways that you can play this game. And this bit on the side right here, which you see, is a news headline section and scenario narrative section. So this game is usually played for 3 hours, and you can fill all of this out and actually develop a complete picture of what the world would look like, and even come up with images that could describe this future world. And the news headlines are used just so that in one phrase, one sentence, we can communicate what the world might look like in the time frame that's given. So we'd like to invite you to learn more about the game. We have the white paper here, which explains how the game is played, and with a complete instruction on how to facilitate the game. This is again developed by Sherman Cruz and the Center for Engaged Foresight. You can download this PDF from the Miro board. Perhaps we can send again in the chat box the link. And you have links here to connect with the Center for Engaged Foresight and to connect again with the Philippine Futures Thinking Society. So you can go through all the different pages of the game. It's just taking a little bit longer to load now, but there are instructions on how to play, the different roles in the game, and the different cards which you can use, and you can adapt again to your context. So there's a special edition of this game that Sherman uses for players from the Philippines only, because you can adapt this and add drivers, add leaders, add disruptions that could reflect the context that you're in. So we invite you to please play this game, and you can share with us how the game has turned out. And we'd like to ask you now if you have any insights and reflections on playing this game. What did you think? It was a little bit difficult for us to get started while we were playing. But once you guys got into it and started to exercise and flex your imagination, the ideas started to flow more naturally. Would you like to facilitate this, Karen? Just gathering insights from everyone?
Yeah, okay. So I'd like to hear from you guys. What are your insights or perhaps reflection on the game that we just had? Did you enjoy it? Maybe we can hear from Andrea is giving a heart, as well as Sydney. Could you give us an insight, Sydney?
Hello. Okay. Hi. Well, at first, indeed, I was adjusting to the game, trying to imagine the scenarios, and I think for most people, we don't really think like 100 years from now, right? So, and since it's 100 years, we're very free. We're free to imagine anything that we can imagine based on the drivers. But as we got along, or as we continue the game, it was interesting how the futures that we encountered are basically like the things that we are experiencing right now. They affected how we imagined our future. So it makes me hopeful that this extreme scenario that we thought of, perhaps that kind of climate or that kind of environment, we can still do something to address this before we reach those that kind of extreme environment. But yeah, definitely I enjoyed the game. It made me like a kid learning everything all over again. So thank you.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing, Sydney. Yep, that's the purpose of gamification. Integrating fun as we imagine how the future might look like. And actually, with regards to what you said about uh we can still do something about these futures that we envision. Actually, there are a lot of tools in futures thinking. There's also another tool called backcasting, wherein we will imagine or will choose a certain future, and then we will track back to the present on how we can reach that future or how we can avoid that certain future. So um, we again invite everyone to get connected with the Philippine Futures Thinking Society if you'd like to learn more about futures thinking and foresight. Yep, thank you so much, Sydney. Anyone else who'd like to share their insight? Yep, maybe Kunwu. How about you, Kunwu? Did you enjoy the game?
Hi. Yes, it was a fun game. I especially liked how I had the chance to think about things that I never thought of. So maybe like as I said before, like I never imagined myself talking to a monkey, but like this gave me a chance to think, oh, and what if I actually do talk to a monkey? What would happen? This way of thinking was kind of new to me, and um, I actually would like to recommend this game to a lot of my friends here. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much for that, Kunwu. Yep, we also agree with you. there are a lot of actually there are a lot of futures, or there are a lot of possibilities that might happen, because we can't really tell what will happen. And definitely we perhaps in a century, maybe communicating between animals might be possible. We'll never know. But I think the important thing here is we have already kind of anticipate these things. No, we already imagined, no, how will we perhaps live in this kind of society. So thank you so much for that, Kunu, and for your interest of sharing this to your friends. Anyone else would like to share?
I see here in the chat box, Karen, we have um from Maiko. She said they said this game makes me imagine very freely because there are no correct or wrong answers, and and that's right, because nobody can say that the future you're thinking of is wrong. Imagine nobody predicted that we would all be living in a very disconnected world right now at this moment, where we would all be conducting everything online, working from home. So why would you limit your imagination? And thank you also, Jean, for your insight that it was very interesting because we had to think outside of the box, especially since our card that we drew was a weird future. And yes, it was very fun hearing everyone's thoughts. And it was nice to think about a future where anything is possible. And we have another comment. I think I prefer the future we imagined more than the present. And this game is supposed to empower us to think about how we can adapt and change and be resilient in the face of the present and in the face of the future that we don't know might happen. And Sherman always likes to say that futures literacy and futures thinking is a tool. And the future is an asset. So we'd like to leave you with those parting words. And thank you, everyone, for your very active participation. Thank you, University of the Philippines. Thank you to the Association of Pacific Rim Universities. And thank you again to our team, Andrea, Sean, Karen, and Sherman. Thank you, everyone. Passing it back to you, Sydney. And again, everyone, you can connect with us, the Philippine Futures Thinking Society, in the chat box. Our link is there, and we will send an invitation for you to join the very first Philippine Futures Summit, focusing on the futures of work, technology, and education in the year 2050, which will be happening this November 12 to 14. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nicole. It was really fun. It was fun and exciting. So thank you so much, everyone, for participating, and of course, thank you, Phil Futures. For now, for the next part, since we are nearing the end of our program, let's have first the awarding of certificates to the workshop team. And to synthesize as well today's activity, we have Associate Professor Lofred Hernandez, and presently the chair of the Department of Behavioral Sciences and Faculty of Health Policy Studies, College of Arts and Sciences, UP Manila. He has extensive research, publication, public service in the areas of community and reproductive health, medical anthropology, ethnopsychiatry, and behavioral sciences. Well, to award the certificates and to synthesize the program, let's give a virtual round of applause to Professor Hernandez. Sir Lau?
Thank you very much. Could you flash the certificates, please? I'm going to award a certificate of appreciation to our colleagues who helped us through this interactive session, a very exciting, creative interaction. A certificate of appreciation is given to Karen Avenido of the Philippine Futures Thinking Society for sharing her expertise and knowledge as facilitator for Workshop 7, YOLO, Youth Opportunities to Lead and Overcome of the APRU Undergraduate Leaders Program for 2021 Sahaya, Science and Arts Harnessing the Youth Advocacies, held on October 24 via Zoom platform. Signed, Dr. Grace Javier Alfonso, the chair of the local organizing committee, and Dr. Aimee Su Martinez, the co-chair also of the local organizing committee. Congratulations, Karen.
Thank you so much, Sir Hernandez.
Thank you. Also, the same certificate of appreciation is given to Andrea Camago from the Philippine Futures Thinking Society, or Phil Futures. Karen? Sorry, Andrea.
Thank you po, Sir Fernandez, and everyone in APRU. Thank you so much for this time.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrea. Equally important, the certificate of appreciation is given to Mr. Sherman Cruz of Phil Futures. And anyone can receive on behalf of Sir Sherman?
Yes, we'll receive this on his behalf. Thank you very much, Professor Lawfred.
Thank you, Nicole. The certificate of appreciation is given to Sean Limbaga of Phil Futures. Sean?
Thank you so much, sir, and to APRU, thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you too, Sean. And of course, the certificate of appreciation is given to Nicole Pareno, Phil Futures. Nicole?
Thank you very much, Professor Lawfred, and we'd like to sign off again by saying Hiraya Manawari to all of you. Hiraya Manawari is a Filipino saying meaning that we hope the dreams and wishes of your hearts are granted. Hiraya Manawari. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nicole. Thank you very much. I will now proceed to the synthesis by way of a closing remark, and I'm going to share my screen with all of you. Hold it for a while. Can everyone see the PowerPoint presentation I'm about to show?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So on behalf of the organizing committee of this particular session, I'm going to do the synthesis of the YOLO, the Youth Opportunities to Lead and Overcome. Hold on. I have to clear some of my... Okay, thank you. Question is, why are we here? YOLO has been a theme in this particular session. You only live once, but in this particular session, we're doing a theme on youth opportunities to lead and overcome. We can reference YOLO and drive the point that we only live once in a world beset by different challenges, and we all have an opportunity to lead and overcome. That's the overarching reason why we are here. The APRU ULP participants, focused on the theme of YOLO amidst emerging challenges in the Asia and the Pacific. Why are we here? We provided you basic knowledge and appreciation of leadership, policy, and governance through interdisciplinary, people-centered, and environmentally sustainable approaches in the context of emerging challenges in the Asia-Pacific in an increasingly globalized world. And that seems to be the values that we have taken in. We explained key principles and frameworks on leadership, policy, and governance. Why are we here? We describe emerging challenges in the Philippines and in the Pacific Rim region, and the importance of interdisciplinary, again, people-centered and environmentally sustained approaches and solutions. We discussed our role and capacity as leaders who can contribute to policy and governance in their home countries. So what did we learn? We learned to apply practical lessons on leadership, decision-making, coordination, and collaboration through the interactive workshop session. Dean Sagil highlighted inclusivity and complementary disciplines towards societal development and progress. Meanwhile, Director Lagmay emphasized that the youth is the voice of the future, social agents of change, pillars for social development. Assistant Professor Dr. Ugadan highlighted that interdisciplinary directions are much needed to gain sustainable efforts in responding effective change in governance. Director Barce, meanwhile, opened his lecture directly quoting Jose Rizal. Youth is the hope of the motherland. It only means that both society and people, the youth particularly, are both important in the existence of the world. One can't exist without the other. Our nation needs young people's ability and capacity in the development. Director Berse tabled that public policy generally consists of set of actions, plan, laws, and behaviors adopted by a government. Concern with the new governance draws attention to the extent to which these actions are often performed now by agents of the state rather than directly by the state. Young people should participate in public policy, and this was echoed during the fast track photo session, including the games. But because mass media, social science, and professional practice tend to emphasize the deficiencies and disengagement of young people, there is a need for more knowledge of their resources and roles as active participants in the policy process. The session also echoed the involvement of the youth who can lead to better policy decisions and outcomes. Your participation promotes the well-being and development of young people, strengthens their commitment to and understanding of human rights and democracy, and provides them a form of protection. It also allows them to take part in the decision process. Youth leadership is the practice of the youth exercising authority over themselves or others. It has been clearly stated in the entire session. Youth leadership has been elaborated upon as a theory of youth development in which young people gain skills, knowledge necessary to lead civic engagement, education reform, and community organizing activities. We soon realize that youth leadership, as we go on with the session, is part of the youth development process and supports the young person in developing several factors. One, we soon realized that what we learned in this session is the ability to analyze his or her own or the youth's strengths and weaknesses, set personal and vocational goals, and have the self-esteem, confidence, motivations, and abilities to carry them out. And B, the ability to guide or direct others on the course of action, influence the opinions and behaviors of others, and serve as a role model. How can we proceed from here after this session? There are a lot of suggestions made in the entire session. The youth plays a great role in nation building, no doubt. It has the power to help a country develop and move towards progress. It also is responsible for bringing social reform within the country. Your voice, your role, your identity is a reflection of your country's determination towards the action towards future. Our youth can bring social reform, improvement in society, and we cannot do without the youth of a country. There are many ways, as we have discussed in our question and answer fora, in which we can help the youth of our country to achieve their potential. For that, the government must introduce programs that will help in fighting off issues like what we have been discussing: unemployment, poor education, inequities. We also discuss inequalities and more to help them prosper without any hindrance. Our youth has the power to build the nation. That's very glaring in the entire session. So that we must give them the appropriate and necessary opportunity. They are the future and they have the perspective which the older generations lack. Their zeal and enthusiasm must be channeled properly to help a nation prosper and flourish. As we all know, in the entire session, that youth is facing too many problems nowadays, especially under the COVID-19 pandemic. We need to give them equal opportunities in every field so that they can succeed well. It is very glaring in our session that they must be given all the facilities and encouraged to take the challenge to achieve success. Through the dreams and disruption game, we soon realize that young people should play a crucial role in addressing both current and future global challenges. The D&D game enable us to have futures thinking and forward thinking, which are really the keywords and tools for youth and youth leadership formation. Strategic foresight, as emphasized by Mr. Cruz of Phil Futures, will need to be crafted. Imagination, seen as a resource for strategic foresight in youth participation in policy making and resolution, including governance. To end this, and to bring home the point at the ground level, the post-COVID-19 era will require immense creativity and resilience. Young people, our participants, have a chance to help restructure societal norms as a new paradigm, as a new imagination is being built. We are at the helm of the most powerful tools for connection in modern day history. The youth cannot divorce itself from social media. Therefore, we have a responsibility to use these platforms to speak in favor of equitable healthcare, equality for all minority groups, and hold our leaders accountable to higher standards than before. Thank you for your participation. Over.
Thank you, Professor Lau, and thank you indeed, everyone, for your active participation. Before we end, a kind reminder to everyone that we'll be having our global cultural activity facilitated by the Culture